The more waves you catch, the more reps you get, the faster you learn. That's the big multiplier, just sheer volume. You could have the worst technique, you could have the worst coach, you could have the most bungled, messed up pop-up ever. But if you catch enough waves, you're gonna eventually figure it out. Your acceleration curve is gonna be even way better. There's a surfer in my community, Pierre. He's only used it for a month. So he went from catching 5 waves a session, going for 8 of them, to catching about 10 waves a session and going for 12 of them. He doubled his wave count, going from 5 to 10. He's like, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna soon be able to do 2 sessions in a day as opposed to just 1. So if he does 2 sessions, he's gonna go from catching 5 waves to catching 20 waves. That's a 4x improvement in his wave count. That's on 1 day. But then what if you multiply that over every week, every month, over years? That 4x is just gonna get exponentially faster.
Do you struggle with your paddle power? Well, I can go months without surfing and roll to pumping waves and surf 3-hour sessions multiple times a day after day after day by using the Basis Paddle Trainer. It was a total game changer for me, and it can be for you too. These things actually work, unlike elastic resistance bands. You can train your paddling anytime, anywhere, so you can catch more waves and have more fun. Just 10 to 20 minutes a couple times a week, and you're gonna be in insane paddle shape. Right? So remember, the key progression is more waves, and the key to more waves is more paddle power. Check it out at surfbasis.com. You're going to be stoked.
So today on the show, we have Van Vu. Van is a fellow surf nerd. He's obsessed with surfing, and he went into learning about surfing in a strong way, became obsessed of sorts, I would say. And that led him into having lots of conversations with different people. And we share a similar journey because we ended up recording those conversations and sharing them with others in order to help them and on their surf journey. He is the host and producer of the Basis Surf podcast, and he is the founder and creator of the Basis Surf Paddle Trainer. Van, have I left anything out in that quick little intro?
I think those are the big things. But yeah, I'm very excited to get interviewed by you and chat about surfing, and let's nerd out together because that's what we both love to do. So
let's start from the beginning. What's your earliest surfing memory?
Oh my God, such a favorite. It's my cousin taught me how to surf. He had long hair, a puka shell necklace. He had a vintage VW bug bus and a bunch of longboards and a hot girlfriend. And he would take me surfing. And I remember like going with him being like, oh my God, this is it. This is the dream. You know, I still remember this is probably still the most magical surf memory of my entire life, more so than any sick wave I've gotten in Hawaii or Indo or Central America or Europe or wherever. But it was July 4th and we paddled out at night. This was, I want to say, where was it? It might have been Dana Point or Huntington, somewhere over there, somewhere in Orange County. I don't remember. But they had this barge that was shooting off fireworks. You know, it was me and my cousins were just like all little kids. And this barge was shooting off fireworks, but my cousin had the idea of paddling out there on longboards. And so we just like paddled out there on our longboards at night, and we were just lying on our backs, like watching the fireworks blow up above us. And then as we were paddling back in, basically the ocean, the phosphorescence of it like illuminated it. So every time we were paddling in the water, our hands were glowing. You know, it was like this crazy, insane, wild experience. And I was just like, oh my God, I love this. Yeah.
Oh, wow. How old were you then?
I was probably like 8, 9, something like that, 10. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's, and you have an experience like that, and that's definitely a strong imprint for sure.
So then do you remember when you first got into shortboarding?
Yes, for sure. Shortboarding was, because I remember, and I think this was a huge mistake that I made, actually. So, you know, I grew up learning how to surf on longboards, but I remember, you know, my cousin, and he was always paddling around on a shortboard, and he would just catch waves, and I would watch him catch these waves, and he would catch these waves earlier and better than I would, even though I was on a longboard. And I always thought, okay, well, obviously he's a really good surfer, so I want to surf like him. So I want to ride a tiny chippy shortboard like he did. So that was always my goal, you know. And of course, what did I do? I moved down to riding the shortest, smallest board possible, like from the beginning. You know what I'm saying? And that was probably one of the biggest things that held back my progression for sure. You know, I think that you learn so much on riding longer boards that you can't learn, or it's going to take you a lot longer to learn on a shorter board. Just the way you read the ocean, for example. Obviously you can catch similar waves on a longboard as a shortboard, but if you're catching waves the way you should be when you're riding larger craft, you should be trying to get into those waves as early as possible before they even break, especially if you're riding like a traditional longboard. And so by developing that skill of like observing the ocean in that way, you are just going to become a much better surfer because you're just going to understand the ocean much better. Versus when you're riding a shortboard, you jump too quickly. What's going to happen? And this is something that was a mistake that I made, right? Because you don't have the same buoyancy, you kind of get into the habit of just waiting until the wave is just about to fall on your head. And because that's for sure when you're going to have the most energy because it's the steepest. But what happens is you're actually catching the wave probably still too late. The best surfers when they're riding shortboards, they're catching the wave still really early relative to beginner surfers. They're catching the wave often sometimes right before the wave is going to break in a similar fashion to what you'll see with people that are riding longboards. So what happens then is you develop all these bad habits because you're dropping into the wave kind of late. So you don't have enough time to do a pop-up properly. So it messes up your pop-up mechanics. You're at the bottom of the wave and then you're running out of speed. So you're doing all these like ugly pumps to try to get around the section, and then you just miss so many waves that way. Whereas if you taken a much more gradual approach, ridden a longer board, gotten better at your wave selection, and really gotten used to that sensation of like riding, an open face green wave, I feel like you can just gradually step down your volume and you'll have much better results in terms of your style, wave selection, speed, all of the fundamentals that are so key than just jumping straight to a shortboard and thinking that you look cool. That's the biggest thing that people care about, though. It's just looking cool, unfortunately. So,
Yeah, well, it sounds like you learnt the hard way.
oh yeah.
How long did it take for you to kind of see the light and then jump back on a board that was a bit more voluminous?
It took a long time because I don't think it really was until, I mean, I still remember seeing like the first clips of Devin Howard riding a mid length when it started going viral, if you will, on Vimeo. Like he wasn't even on YouTube. He wasn't even on Instagram. I just remember seeing this clip. It must have been like, I don't know, 12, 14 years ago, something like that. I don't even remember how long ago. And I just remember seeing him riding this bigger board. And I was like, whoa, what is he doing? He's riding this weird looking board. I mean, weird relative to like this was like the same era when like Dane Reynolds came out with the Proton and was like ripping on a Proton, the
Mm.
most rockered out board that you can get. And then you see Devin Howard, or I mean, it's all kind of in that same time frame. But I remember having like getting a Proton, a super rockered out, super knifey board built for like the most hollowest of hollow waves, and then struggling on a Proton. And then I remember seeing Devin Howard just doing these beautiful turns on what would look like they called them fun boards back then. There was no
Yeah,
term for them. They
that's
they
right.
called them fun boards. I mean, I guess some people would call them eggs, but like that whole alternative surf world it existed for sure, but it wasn't quite on the forefront of things. And I saw that and that really like opened my eyes. But even then, I didn't hop quite on that because there's still so much ego involved. And the funniest thing about ego is your ego makes you think that you want to like hold a narrower board under your arm. But what your ego should be telling you is you actually look worse on that short board. You know what I'm saying? And if you look at somebody that's riding a bigger board with more control, more precision, catching better waves, you actually look better on that bigger board, even though the board is bigger, you know?
Yes,
So
yeah.
it's this weird thing, but people get hung up about riding, a big board. Now, that being said, I do think that in general, I think people should be slower to drop volume in their boards because they rush down too quick. But I also think one of the biggest, so I think I had like two interesting breakthroughs I had an interesting breakthrough when I went from riding super chippy shortboards and then riding bigger boards. Because then all of a sudden I was making sections that I wasn't able to make. I just had this different understanding of the wave because it just slows time down. And then it also allowed me to like, because it slowed time down, I was able to like focus on my turns and just like my timing and my understanding of it. But then the second big unlock came when I started sizing down after that. Because I think a lot of people make a mistake where, well, it's not necessarily a mistake. It's more of like a decision. It's a decision in terms of what you want out of your surfing. But, you can turn a bigger board. You just look at Devin Howard, look at Torrin Martin, especially if you get the right board, right? I think riding twins, for example, in your mid lengths will loosen it up a lot. But I I experimented a bunch with mid lengths because I just saw a lot of actually really good surfers in where I surf in Rockaway ride mid lengths as well. These are guys that really rip. They're incredible surfers, but I noticed that they were riding these mid lengths on the really tiny days when Rockaway is just breaking super fast and is really soft and it's like hard to make these sections. And then you would also see them ride it when it's pumping and barreling. So that's when I was like, oh, okay, this is an unlock, and it's not just for, these are actually good surfers that are riding these bigger boards. So that was like this really big unlock for me. So I was like, okay, this seems like something that is really that could help my progression. So I started experimenting with that. But then that really I would say that really helped my surfing in a lot of ways. But then I would get stuck, and then I think the second unlock came after I had mastered a lot of the fundamentals that I'd gained from riding larger craft. And then once I had really started to kind of solidify those foundations, then I think the next step was actually sizing down and sizing down in a really thoughtful manner. And for me, I was very incremental in my approach, and but the sizing down was a huge unlock because, when you're riding a bigger board and you're trying to do a turn on a bigger board, you can do a turn on a bigger board, like I said, Devin Howard and whatnot, but your foot placement has to be perfect, right? You have to really get your foot all the way back. You also have to have your mechanics way more dialed because a bigger board is going to be that much more resistant to your body mechanic, the body mechanics that you utilize for your turn. So if you don't have the proper body mechanics and you don't got your foot placement dialed in, when you go to try to do that turn, the board's just not going to respond. So I was hitting this other plateau, and that's when I realized I really need to focus on downsizing my volume. And then once I started to downsize my volume, okay, and I worked on my body mechanics and really started to really dissect and think about, what it takes, the biomechanics of a turn, those two things together were key because by having a smaller board, number one, my foot placement naturally just landed much more all the way back, and I know that a ton of surfers really struggle with moving their back foot. It's a skill that you have to develop, but it is a huge struggle for surfers. I talk to really, really good surfers and they still remind themselves like, I have to move that back foot. That's such a big thing that everybody struggles with. So, but if you ride a smaller board, your back foot just naturally lands smaller, lower back, farther back because you're just riding a shorter board. So your foot placement gets solved. And then because the board is more sensitive, it's going to be more sensitive to you trying to do a turn. Sometimes, there's that criticism. You'll see people where they're like, I mean, you see this all the time. I think a lot of coaches talk about it. People will move their arms and try to do a turn, but the board doesn't seem to move. Now, a lot of that is because there's this disconnection from the upper body to the lower body. Part of that is also that their foot placement probably isn't there. But a big part of it as well is their just body mechanics aren't there, so they don't know how to move their body to actually get the turn, and the board is too big. So by eliminating a bunch of those variables, okay, you got a smaller board, so your foot placement is naturally going to be better. Your board is smaller, so it's more sensitive, so it's going to naturally respond to you more. And then what's going to happen is you're going to go through this really, it's a little tricky, but it's kind of like a difficult phase where you're going to experiment a lot with your technique, but it's going to look worse. That's the hard part. Your technique is going to look worse because you're riding a more sensitive board and you haven't figured out the right body mechanics. And that's the problem. You went from riding a rowboat or a tugboat to now you're riding you went from riding a pickup truck or an 18 wheeler and now you're riding an F1 car, right? So when you jump into the F1 car, that thing is going to go all crazy. You're going to be like doing wheelies. You're going to be falling over, flipping, all that kind of stuff. But the thing is, that's a natural part of the process where you need to go through that process. The board is going to be more sensitive and it's going to look worse, but at least you're going to begin to feel, oh, when I do this, the board does this. When I do that, the board does that. And you have to go through that process. But and what you want to do is you want to gradually dial it down so it doesn't become too sensitive too quickly. But once you've done that, okay, then you can really experiment with your body mechanics, how it impacts the board. And then eventually that's really going to, I think, allow you to finally, realize the turns that you've been going for. And so, I mean, just so my board, I went from riding like 5 5s up to riding 7 0s. And now my board is a 5 2.
Yep.
Now I'm back down to 5 2s.
Yeah.
And now I'm finally feeling like, oh, that's what it feels like, truly feels like to do, a proper turn on rail. You know what I'm saying? And I'm wrapping all the way back and I'm like, that's a proper turn, and I'm feeling that rail engage all the way around as I wrap around. And I'm like, that's it. And I wasn't able to do that on any other craft until I started to really size down.
Yeah.
Now, the problem, of course, is when you size down, you need more paddle power. That's the big thing. And we can get into that. But and I think that there's a right size of board. I think you want to dial your quiver in depending on where you're surfing as well. I wouldn't ride a 5 2 with 5 4 rubber in Rockaway, but I would ride that in Central America, right?
Yeah.
But that's kind of a lot of the evolution or a lot of the thinking that I had to struggle through myself.
No, that's great advice. Stepping down incrementally from a longboard all the way through to a shortboard is the way to do it. I mean, it's laid out in front of us in the movie North Shore, if you recall that one. That's
Right.
That's exactly what his surfing teacher makes him do.
Yeah.
Goes from the massive traditional boards, stepping down to clean up his technique, and the thing is, as you progress down, those surfboards you can still keep them and surf, and because then they're relevant for different conditions, and you build yourself a nice little quiver.
100%. Yeah, no, because then you can, I mean, I love busting out the 7.6 every once in a while. I actually got a 7.6 because I'm like, I'm gonna ride this when it's like 1 foot. I have a traditional longboard. I'll ride those guys when it's 1 foot. You're not gonna have any kind of fun on like a smaller craft. So
Yeah.
It's like golf clubs or whatever, as they say.
Yes. Now, which part of the journey, like, what was the inspiration for starting the podcast?
Inspiration was just I wanted to talk to my heroes. I was like, I feel like, well, the first thing is your podcast was an inspiration for sure, because you have interviewed so many legends. And I was like, this was so great. But I wanted to like dig into it. I had my own questions and I wanted to talk to not just coaches, but I also wanted to talk to pro surfers and I wanted to talk to board makers as well and shapers and really get a perspective from like all the different angles, what is it like inside the mind of an elite like Parker Coffin or Dane Gudauskas or Zeke Lau? And then what is it like when I'm talking to a coach who like Doug Silva, who's coaching Seth Moniz? And then what about interviewing Eric Kawa, who actually makes the boards for, all the best pros that are when they're coming to Hawaii? So I wanted to get that almost three-dimensional view of kind of the best in all the different areas that would help your surfing. But it was just pure selfishness. I just wanted to ask nerdy questions to, my favorite surfers, and unlock like little hidden gems along the way that would help my surfing. But I knew for it to get, to have the biggest impact, I was like, well, I want to help other surfers as well, because there's so little of that dialogue and that discussion. And your podcast was, again, a huge inspiration, but I wanted to go even nerdier and more into the weeds a little bit, although you definitely do that as well. But I was just like, well, let's see how it goes. And it kind of just like snowballed. I had a couple friends on the podcast, and then I got Isaac Stant, who's a pro surfer. He grew up surfing with Matt Miola and Albie Layer and all the big Jaws guys that pioneered Jaws. And then I got Matt Miola, and then I got, and it just kind of went from there. So, when you got the world's best aerialists in the world, and that definitely got the ball rolling. And I've just been really lucky to nerd out and just ask all the questions that
Yeah,
I wanted to. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, listeners of this show love that stuff. So I urge them to go ahead and get into yours, which is Basis Surf Podcast on all platforms, including YouTube. It's awesome. You've gone the extra effort and put into producing the actual videos and putting them on YouTube, which is awesome. So I definitely urge people to go and check that out. There will be links to that podcast in the show notes. Now, what are some of the main lessons that you've learnt through doing the podcast, and how has that helped your surfing?
Yeah, I think it is kind of what I mentioned earlier, where it's like every coach has their own a way of explaining things and their own perspective on things. Of course, there's lots of like small details that have been very interesting that I've learned, but it's almost more. But the interesting thing is when you listen to this podcast enough, and you get these what can be actually fairly divergent opinions on things. So I'll interview one coach and he'll be talking about how you want to be really all on your front foot. And then I'll interview another coach and they'll be like, you want to be all the way on your back foot, you know? And it's interesting. I was talking to Philippe Malveaux about this. So he's a really good coach. He has coached like Kanoa Igarashi. And so let's give you some examples of the continuum, right? So like I know Clayton from Ombe talks a lot about being on your front foot. And then I was talking to Shado, North Shore pipe legend. He's like, you got to be all on your back foot. And then I was talking to Philippe Malveaux, and he was talking, and we were actually having this discussion about how it's so interesting that different coaches and different people will have different perspectives. Like, should you be more front footed? Should you be more back footed? But what I think it has allowed me to do is it's allowed me to realize, number one, there's a continuum with anything, right? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to manage that continuum, and you have to figure out where you want to position yourself on that continuum. And you also have to calibrate it to the wave, okay? And you have to calibrate it to the board that you're riding. So when it comes to front foot versus back foot, right? Obviously, most people know the basics. Front foot, you're going to generate more speed, back foot for more control. On the side of like Shado, there's no way in hell you're going to do a turn on a longboard if your weight is all on your front foot. The only way to turn a longboard is to get your back foot all the way back on the back foot. That's the only way you're going to turn it, right? But, what is Clayton talking about? Or is he insane? Well, no, he's not insane, right? So you can get more speed and engage the rail when you put more weight onto the front foot when you're doing your turn. So really, both are right. But I think the real question is understanding what that continuum is you want to play on, right? So you have to start to think about, okay, there is such a thing as weight distribution, right? I should be cognizant of how much weight do I have on my front foot? How much weight do I have on my back foot? When am I applying pressure to the front foot versus the back foot throughout the different, sections of the turn that I'm going through? And then you also have to recognize that you have to, and this is where I think working with a coach like you, Michael, or whoever you decide to work with, is really helpful, because everybody comes into their technique with certain, what do I say, like tendencies, So Shado, when I interviewed him, I was like, well, have you always been back footed? He's like, no, I actually used to be too front footed. And I had to overcorrect and go much more onto my back foot. And that's what unlocked it for me. Right. Whereas I haven't asked Clayton this, but I wouldn't be surprised if Clayton came from a world where he just naturally was too back footed and he was stalling out. And then what was the big unlock for him is by focusing more on getting weight onto the front foot, he was able to generate way more speed, So I think everybody's coming at technique from a certain, not biased perspective, but a little bit of a biased perspective, because this is how they've figured out the problem themselves. And the thing is that it really depends on where you're coming from. So if you're already a really front-footed surfer, and then someone tells you need to be even more on the front foot, and then you're trying to do a turn on a mid-length, it's probably not going to work, right? You might actually have to go more onto your back foot. And that's where having a coach is going to be helpful, because they can actually see what you're doing and be like, oh, you probably actually need to get more on your back foot. Or it might be the opposite, right? You might be riding a shortboard and you're just doing these really flicky turns and you're just stalling out. And the answer for you might be, oh, you should actually try to get more on your front foot, right? But by understanding that continuum, okay, front foot versus back foot, understanding where you're coming in at it, okay, and then kind of putting all these pieces together, really analyzing your technique and all that, then I think you can develop this much more comprehensive picture and understanding of what's going on. But I think that's just one example of what I mean by how talking to all these different coaches and pros and shapers and whatnot have helped me develop like this, three-dimensional map in my head of different perspectives of how it all actually works. Because I think in a lot of ways, talking about surfing and like being technical discussion of surfing is I've had this discussion with Marcelo. He's an Olympic surf coach. He's at Puro Surf. And he's like,
Mm-hmm.
we were talking and he was just like, yeah, surf coaching and discussion of surfing is like kind of still in its infancy. Like, cause he talks about BJJ. And BJJ, it's super technical, right? But you're able to
Yeah.
practice things and drill things over and over again. And he was talking about I mean, you talk to a lot of pros and they're just like, I don't know how I do what I do, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I remember Nathan Florence was like trying to figure out, he went on like air camp. He went to John, his brother, and was like, hey, how do you do an air? And then John's response was like, I don't know. You just go fast and then you see the section and then you just do the air. That's how one of the world's best aerialists describes how to do an air. So there's this really big disconnect between like how the best. So I don't necessarily think that the best surfers are the best teachers. That's 100% for sure
Oh
not the
yeah.
case.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? So it's like, but the language and the way of thinking about it, especially because surfing as a culture is very resistant to training, resistant to like being technical because it's like a lifestyle.
Yeah.
It's kind of still in this infancy. And I feel like by talking to all these people, I've begun to like flesh out, like at least for myself and hopefully for the people that listen to my podcast, their understanding of like how things work. And I don't know, it's been really helpful for me. And I get a ton of people being like, "Oh, I got my first barrel from that tip or whatever," and that's really gratifying. So,
Oh,
hopefully it's
awesome.
helping others as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Surfing is so nuanced and varied as well because yeah, if you're growing up on the North Shore on a surf on a shortboard and a big shortboard and you want to do powerful
Yeah.
turns, yeah, you're going to be on your back foot a little bit more than someone who's on a small wave shortboard in weak waves. They might need to be a bit more front footed, or
Exactly.
maybe one of their legs has an old ankle injury, and your body resists putting weight on that foot, or maybe a particular surfboard needs more weight forward or back, or so.
Yep.
I think it's cool to go through all these different tips, like you said, and try them and see what suits your surfing the best, and then I guess you kind of develop your own sense over time of trying all these different ways of thinking.
Well, I mean, so that's the thing, right? I mean, so, you bring up a good point. Like, how the heck did John get so good? Like, he never thought about it. So, how did he do it? But I mean, so this is what it comes down to, right? There's two ways to learn. One way of learning is, and this is the way all the best pros did, they just learned it through brute volume, If you're a kid and you have unlimited amounts of time to surf and you go for a million waves every time you go surf because your body is young and you never get tired and you can spend 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours just like in your backyard because your backyard is at the North Shore, you're going to catch a million waves and it's just going to be trial and error and you're just going to subconsciously absorb the technique. It's going to become this, there's different levels of learning, right? So there's unconscious competence, which is where John's at. Like he is incredibly competent, but he's unconscious. He just knows how to do it, right? And then there's conscious competence, and then there's conscious incompetence, and then there's unconscious incompetence. And a lot of people are unconsciously incompetent, and they don't even know what they're doing wrong, and they're just doing it wrong, right? And then there's consciously competent. Now that's a really tricky situation to be in because it's the most demoralizing and ego. It hurts the ego the most because you're doing it wrong. But You can't stop it, but at least that's the place where you can begin to improve. Okay. And then eventually, hopefully, you get to consciously competent, right? But like there's two ways to get to consciously competent, which is where, and then eventually unconsciously competent is volume. That's really what it comes down to. It's volume and then doing it intelligently. So there's like, in my view, there's this curve that you can go on. You want to be on the curve that is going to have the steepest line because for every additional wave or additional rep that you get, you're going to learn more. And I think the way you do that is by being really conscious of what you're doing and being aware of what you're doing. And the more aware you are of what you're doing, and I don't want you to get in your head and overanalyze every little thing, and especially if you're the kind of person that gets really self-critical. But if you're hyper aware and you're hyper curious, I believe that you can accelerate that progression, that the slope of that line. But even if you are super aware and nerdy and you listen to every single one of my podcasts and every single one of your podcasts, Michael, unless you put in the volume, you're not going to have any results because you still need that feedback from the world. So you can have this incredible theoretical understanding, but if you don't combine it, because ultimately this is a sport, if you don't combine it with actual volume and catching more and more waves, your theory is never going to meet the real world. And then as a result, you're not going to progress. So the key ingredient is volume. And that's what all the best surfers in the world have. They just surf a lot. And then that's how they get good. And they just figure it out. And they're also genetic freaks, right? But the problem, so there's two things. Here's the two things for the everyday surfer that can't surf all the time. So what are the two things that you need to do? Okay. Number one, learn as much as possible. So great resources like Surf Mastery Podcast, my podcast. And then number two, you need to catch more waves.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Because the more waves you catch, the more reps you get, the faster you learn. It's very simple math.
Yeah.
And the key thing to getting more waves, the biggest limiting factor for most surfers is their paddle power.
Definitely.
You know? And that's why I developed the Basis Paddle Trainer, because that was my limiting factor. That's the biggest thing that was holding me back. You know?
Yeah.
So it was that is the other piece
I think
that allowed me to really accelerate my curve.
I love what you're saying there, and I think you can. Like obviously, if you started surfing when you were 4 and you're paddling every day, as your body grows, you're developing that paddle fitness. But you're also, most of these pro surfers, they're kind of genetic freaks. They're so gifted.
Yeah.
Their neurological level of body awareness is just better than ours. But what you can do as an adult learner or someone who's been surfing all their lives and wants to obsess on it for a period of time, wherever you are in that journey, if you start training on dry land and going through the repetitions of good technique and body position in a mirror, for example, you can increase your body awareness and your surf body intelligence very, very fast and without getting as much time in the water. However, you're right. If you want to put that new, stronger, more aware surf style into practice by standing on more waves and then working on your technique, it's not going to happen if you can't paddle into the wave. And the thing is, I actually think that once you're standing up on a surfboard with your feet in the right place, surfing is actually not that difficult. You look at a lot of surfers, especially Oki, they don't even move their bodies that much. They just stand in the right way and they have great timing and balance. But going from lying on your stomach and paddling into a wave with good timing to getting to your feet, paddling into a wave, especially on a shortboard, is an athletic feat, man. It is hard. And if you don't have the strength and endurance to paddle, it's just not going to happen. It really isn't. And if you don't have access to a swimming pool, I mean, swimming's great, but it's, you don't have the resistance of a surfboard. So yeah, I love what you've done with the product, because elastic bands and cable machines at the gym just don't cut it, man. I've been through stages of that, and it doesn't cut it. So what inspired you to develop this product?
Yeah, it's literally what I just talked about. Like, I realized I was looking at my progression and I realized this is this massive bottleneck. And I'm the kind of person that gets really, really obsessed with things. And like, I'm only going to commit myself to something if I think that I have a decent shot at getting good at it. Like I'm not gonna bother like getting into surfing if I'm just gonna be a mediocre, crappy surfer. And then I started getting, and I was just like, I feel like I'm hitting this bottleneck. Living in New York with I was like, maybe I should just give up surfing. Like maybe I just gonna focus on other things. Like I have a ton of friends that have been like that. Like my friend Keola grew up surfing, you know, went to the same high school as John, and I mean, he still surfs. He still loves surfing, but like he's very much like a recreational surfer now. He'll just go and surf and catch a couple waves and have a beer on the beach. You know what I'm saying? He's not like that's not his thing anymore because he's
Mm.
just like, I live in New York now and I don't get to surf enough. The waves, I mean, waves can get good, but like I can't stay in shape. I have a lot of friends that are like that. There's actually a lot of Hawaii people in New York. And so I just realized, okay, there's this huge bottleneck. There's this massive bottleneck in surfing, and it's because of just staying in paddle shape, you know. Unless you live right next to the beach and it's super convenient for you to just like run out the. I have friends that live at Rockaway Beach, literally 5 minutes from the beach, and they complain to me about their paddle fitness because when it's cold in here in New York, you can go several weeks before there's good waves,
Mm.
and if it's freezing and snow is on the ground and the wind is howling at 40 miles an hour, do you really want to get into a 5'4" wetsuit and then paddle around 1 foot waves? No, a lot of people are not going to want to do that. So I was just like, and then, so I was just like, how do I stay in shape for these swells? How do I stay in shape when I am going to go on a surf trip? So I tried all the things you were just talking about. I tried elastic resistance bands. I'd roll up on trips and I would get smoked. Okay. I tried funny exercises on the cable machine. I would get smoked. I would go to the pool. This is how desperate I was. Just everybody that's listening, just imagine the kookiest guy in a swimming pool strapping a flotation boards to his chest to pretend like it was flotation on a surfboard and then paddling around with that. You would think it would have worked. It still didn't quite do it. There's something about, like I wasn't able to train getting into that arch, maintaining that prone position with that arch is incredibly. I have so many people who are like, that is my biggest limiting factor. I just can't stay in that position. And what people don't understand is that holding that position has such a huge impact on your paddle endurance. Okay. Because a lot of people really struggle with their paddling just because of the recovery stroke. That's the limiting factor. When like you get into that, you're like, I can't lift my hands and like do another paddle. That's because all these tiny little rotator cuff muscles that are required when you're doing external rotation and abduction, those don't get worked at all doing anything in regular life. Like daily modern life, you never work out those muscles. And then you go from not surfing, having not surfed for 3 weeks, and you go on a surf trip and you're surfing 5 hours a day for 10 days straight. What's going to happen to you? You're working these tiny little muscles. So you're not doing that prone position either. You're doing the opposite when you're sitting at a desk. So the
Yeah.
thing is that those two things are very interrelated though, because if you don't have enough arch in your back and you can't maintain that for long extended periods of time, then what's going to happen is your shoulders and your chest are going to drop down to the board. And what's going to happen there then is in order to do your recovery stroke, which is when you're returning your hand from the end of the stroke to the beginning of the stroke, is going to be so much more strenuous because you're going to have to lift your hand over the water. But if your chest is right at the water, the range of movement and kind of activity that is going to be required is going to be so much more. So versus if you're able to maintain that arch, you're going to be able to you're going to have so much more space and you don't have to lift your shoulders quite as much anymore. If you're able to maintain that high arch in your back, well, this means that when you lift your hand and return it over the water for your recovery stroke, it's going to be a solid 2 to 3 inches below your shoulder. So that means so much less energy needed and strain on your rotator cuff muscles just for that recovery stroke, right? And those two things are when there, there's hundreds of people in my community, that I'm helping that have gotten the trainer and I'm watching their technique and I'm watching them. And those two things are some of the most common mistakes that I see. There are the limiting factor for these guys. And so those are the things though you can't really train unless, you're actually going to, I mean, you can train it. That's what was the eye-opening thing for me. I was like, I need to figure out how to train this. And then by training it, I will go for not surf. I mean, leading up to the launch of the product, I went and didn't surf for 6 months basically because I was just working 24/7. And then I roll up and I went down to Central America on a swell, and it was the biggest swell of the year. Like I was out there with, in some pretty fun waves, it was like double, triple overhead. And I was surfing on my 5.2, and I was surfing for 3 hour sessions, 2, 3 hour sessions a day, and then I would work. But I went from not surfing, but I was paddle training. That was the thing. So for anybody that struggles with getting in shape, who has a limited time, I mean, that's the thing. That's the biggest resource is just your time. So if you're going to spend all this money to go on a surf trip, and then you're going to roll up on that surf trip, and then halfway through the surf trip, you're just smoked and you can't even surf and you're just in pain, which was me, right? And then you just spend half that trip just being bummed because you're looking at all these other people just getting the waves of their life, but you can't even like paddle anymore because you're just so tired. That's the most frustrating thing in the world, right? So
Yeah.
why not just dedicate a little bit of time, train beforehand, and then roll up, and then you're going to be having the time of your life. So, and that's the key thing to accelerating your progression as well, you know?
Oh
So
yeah. Yeah. Catch more waves. Simple as that.
it
And you have
it's
to.
so simple.
Yeah. No, I'm impressed with the product you've developed. It's the closest thing to paddling a surfboard out there, full stop. Even if you walk into a fancy gym with all the expensive equipment, nothing comes close to what you've developed. And it fits in a suitcase and it costs less than a secondhand surfboard. It's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah. I mean, there's a surfer in my community, Pierre. He's only used it for a month, and he goes to the wave pool, and he gave me actual numbers so I can quantify it, right? So he went from catching 5 waves a session, going for 8 of them, to catching about 10 waves a session and going for like 12 of them. Now, if you look at those ratios, right? So so number one, he doubled his wave count going from 5 to 10. Number two, he doubled his conversion of waves that he paddled, or not doubled. He dramatically increased the conversion of waves that he paddled for that he actually caught. And the thing that he realized is he would struggle to pop up. And everybody struggles with their pop up. But what makes you really struggle with your pop up is when you're massively fatigued. You're already tired from
Yes.
paddling. And then you have to do this really dynamic, explosive movement. And then you can't get to your feet because you're tired. So that's the reason why he was able to go from 8 attempted waves and catching 5 to 12 attempted waves and catching 10, right? So his ratio improved. And now he's talking about this. He's like, I'm only a month in. He's like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to soon be able to do 2 sessions in a day as opposed to just one. So if he does 2 sessions, he's going to go from catching 5 waves to catching 20 waves. That's a 4x improvement in his wave count. That's on one day. But
Mm.
then what if you multiply that over every week, every month, over years? That 4x is just going to get exponentially faster. His progression is going to go exponentially faster. So it really comes down to volume. That's what it comes down to. It comes down to your wave count. It comes down to your volume, and anything that you can do to improve that conversion of waves that you paddle for so you catch more waves, that's going to be the biggest thing. That's going to be where you're going to get the highest return on investment. So earlier I was talking about that slope of your acceleration and your progression, right? So you got to think about, how do I get more volume in there, right? And then how do I get that slope faster? And really it's just catching more waves. I mean, that's the big multiplier, just sheer volume. You could mess everything else up. You could literally mess everything else up. You could have the worst technique. You could have the worst coach. You could have the most bungled, messed up pop up ever. But if you catch enough waves, you're going to eventually figure it out. But if you get a lot of waves, if you get tons and tons of waves and you learn the proper technique for all these other things, your acceleration curve is going to be even way better than somebody who's just, what do most people do? They just bumble along. They're like, surfing. And then, this is actually what most people do. They like get into surfing. And they're like, oh, I want to surf like John John. And then they see John John surfing. They're like, let me look on how to do a turn. And then they get really obsessed with like the technique to do a turn, but they don't even know how to like catch waves and pop up.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
They can't even generate speed. And they're just like, how do I do a turn on a shortboard? I'm like, you're focusing on the wrong thing right now,
Yep.
you know?
Yeah, people
So,
do. That's a big problem, man. It's you got to paddle. It's
right.
there's no way around it, man. There is no
Yeah.
way around it. The best in the world will paddle past you on smaller boards because that's the difference.
Right.
How strong they are at paddling. And yeah, I love this product, man. And people who are obsessed with surfing and want to get better, they will put the time and effort in. They might not tell anyone
Right.
that they're doing 15 minutes of paddle
That's
training a
fine.
day, but it doesn't matter because their surfing will speak volumes. Where can people go to have a look at and see this product, find out more about it, and purchase it?
Yeah, just go to surfbasis.com. That's surfbasis.com. Or just check out our Instagram, go surf basis. And yeah, you find us on there. We're on pretty much on all the social media channels. We're on podcasts, we're on Spotify, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I mean, if I was gonna say one more, because I'm a nerd, let me just give you one more numerical example, right? So let's say, because I think this touches on like so many things, right? So let's say in an hour you have a good surfer. And so this is going to speak to really, because I like to think about, this is the reason why I named basis. I like to think about surfing as being like this pyramid. So it's this pyramid, right? Most people are focused on the very tippy top of that pyramid, which is like doing turns. But really that's like the icing, that's the cherry on the cake, right? At the very bottom though, it's actually not even paddling. It's ocean knowledge and reading waves. That's the very base. You could be the best paddler in the world, but if you can't read the waves, you're not going to catch any waves. But then above that is your paddling, and then above that is going to be your pop up, and then above your pop up is speed generation, and then you get to do turns. And then like there's a continuum over here that supports it, or a tray that supports it, which is going to be board selection, your PT mobility, and making sure your body is healthy and all of your training and all that kind of stuff. But like that's the pyramid, right? And most people are focused on the wrong part of the pyramid when they should be focusing on the base, which is why I named it basis, which is paddling. That is when I interviewed Zeke Lau, he is CT surfer, and he said paddling is the basis of surfing, right? He struggles with paddling and he would train paddling. But the other way you can think about it is you can think of this, you can flip the pyramid and you can think about it as like a funnel. And what you're trying to do is you want to make that funnel as wide as possible to catch as many waves. And then you want to convert as many of those waves into good waves as possible so you can get more reps, so you can do more turns. And then that's what's going to yield the biggest progression. So if you look at a good surfer, what's going to happen is they have a really wide funnel because they have really good wave reading. And so let's say that they can, in an hour, they can identify and catch 10 waves in a session. Okay. Now, of those 10 waves that they identify, let's say they have the paddle power because they're in good shape to catch 9 of them. Then they can pop up on 8 of them. And then let's say they successfully pick the right line, generate speed, and then get to do turns on 7 of them, right? 7 or
Yeah.
6 of them, something like that. Now, compare a beginner surfer or a beginner intermediate surfer. So in that same hour, they may only see 6 waves. They may only have the paddle power to catch 3 of them. They pop up on 2 of them, and only on 1 of them did they even get to ride it, and they may not have even gotten a section to do a turn, right? So then what is that ratio then? You're looking at 6 waves that the good surfer is going to get versus 1 wave for the beginner surfer. That's a 6-to-1 ratio.
Yeah.
That's in 1 hour, right? Now, that's 1 hour, but then what if, if you're a good surfer and the waves are good, you're going to surf for 3 hours. So you're going to get 18 waves if you're a good surfer. If you're a beginner surfer, you're not even going to be able to surf 3 hours because you're going to be too tired and you don't have the paddle power. So you may only surf 2 hours. So you're going to get 2 waves. So now you can going 18 waves versus 2 waves. That is a 9x difference between the good surfer and the beginner surfer now. And that is why good surfers, they have it almost seems unfair. Like you'll be, this has happened, right? I'm sure this has happened to every one of us. We're paddling out, we see a good surfer, catch a good wave, rip the crap out of it, and then they make it out. We're still trying to make it out the back. We're duck diving, and then you see him paddle out, and then you see him catch another wave. That's what's happening. So if you're a good surfer, you may get 9 times the number of waves a beginner surfer is going to get. 9 times the number of waves. And that's just in one session. Again, scale that up over weeks, months, years. That's why good surfers are, it seems like magic when you look at a pro in the water. You're just like, that doesn't seem even human what you're doing. Like when I'm on the North Shore and I see like pros in the water, I'm just like, I don't know how you took off like 20 yards behind the section that everybody else is sitting on and you still made that wave, And when everybody was like, you know, and you come from around the section and you just like do a turn in the most death-defying place where everybody just be scared for their lives. Like that's what I remember seeing just crazy stuff like that on the North Shore when I was there. I'm just like, but they're catching 9 waves, 9 times as many waves every single time they paddle out versus like a normal surfer. And
Yeah.
so it's almost disheartening because you're like, well, what am I going to do? Well, focus on the fundamentals, catch more waves, get your paddle power in shape, and you're going to be able to increase your ratio and you're going to be able to catch more waves and your acceleration curve is going to dramatically get steeper versus someone that isn't training.
Yeah.
If you can bump that conversion ratio for any of these components even a little bit, it is going to pay dividends. And you got to think about compound interest, right? Don't think about it in terms of like one session. Think about it session over days, months, years, because this is a game of years. That's surfing,
yeah.
right?
Yep.
It's a game of years. So you really have to think about how are you going to get steep in that curve over years. And then if you just pay attention to that long-term, big-term objective, don't even worry. That progression will take care of itself if you put enough volume into it. So yeah, I don't know. It's something I feel really passionate about. So I just wanted to, share that. So.
Oh yeah, totally agree. And furthermore, it's not just the beginners. Like even if you're out in the water and you're as good a surfer as the surfers that are sitting on the peak, but they surf every day, they're just going to out paddle you. They're going to snake
Oh
you.
yeah.
So
Oh yeah.
even if you're a good surfer and now you're working lots and you don't have time to get in the water, well, yeah, you want to
Oh
go
yeah.
out there and compete. You got to keep your paddle fitness. It's the first thing to go in terms
Oh,
of
100%.
surfing skills and surfing fitness. It's the first thing to go. So maintaining that surfing fitness is key. Like even when I was living in Sydney, Tom Carroll was open ocean swimming every day.
Yeah.
Just to keep up paddle fitness.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's what it is. That's huge.
Yeah. Yeah. Van, thank you so much. Remind us again of the website and the podcast.
Yep. It's surfbasis.com. That's surfbasis.com. And then go surf basis, basis.com. All right, sorry, go surf basis. You guys will find it. But yeah, that's where you'll find it.
Yep. Awesome. There'll be links to all that stuff in the show notes and of course on my Instagram with this post as well. Van, thank you so much. Appreciate your time and your efforts in the podcast. And of course, I imagine it was a hell of a journey developing such a product. So thank you for doing it.
Yep. It was 3 years. I traded a 9 to 5 for a 24/7 for 3 years, but hopefully I'm going to be able to help some people along the way. And that's what will make it all worth it. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Van.
All right.
Oh, I should have asked you before we did the show, but do you offer discounts at all under discount codes for things like this?
Yeah. And so if listeners want a discount, you guys can use the code Surf Mastery and get a discount and get your wave counts up.
Awesome. All right, Van, thank you so much.